Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, a podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Stories from the week ending September 9, 2023. We begin with a continuing saga of the Spanish kiss, as we had two stories this week. The first from ESPN, that Spain's World Cup winning coach, Jorge Vilda, was fired by the Spanish Football Federation as the fallout from his boss, Luis Rubiales' behavior continued. Rubiales was reportedly suspended by FIFA. In another story, that story came to us from the Financial Times. Additionally, the Spanish women's football team has announced that they will not play for Spain in national competition until Rubiales is sanctioned or leaves his current position. So the position seemed hardened. FIFA has spoken as well, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens down the road. But the writing is clearly on the wall that Rubiales is going to have to go, and if he doesn't, there's going to be a full-scale revolt. Next up, the first of two stories from the Wall Street Journal this week. The first one comes to us from the Risk and Compliance Journal, Richard Vandeford reporting. And it's a story about how AI, or companies rather, are using AI to make work safer. For instance, at Amazon's fulfillment center in New Jersey, the shelves actually go to the workers, and the workers don't go to the shelves. Shelves actually move for workers to reapproach and restock them, and it's called a goods-to-person strategy. Obviously, this is something that has to have human oversight, but the lost time injury rate decline has been pretty impressive, 69% from 2019 to 2022. And in Amazon facilities that did not use the strategy or the AI-based safety protocols, the injuries were 21% higher. So there is clearly some significant benefit to this, and it's going to be interesting to see how AI can actually help to make the workplace safer. Our second story from the Wall Street Journal also comes to us from the Risk and Compliance Journal, this time Dylan Tokar reporting that the Justice Department's oligarch hunters have widened their scope to include facilitators. A year and a half into its existence, the task force Capture is looking beyond flashy assets such as yachts and planes as it seeks to shut down the network of facilitators that oligarchs rely on to raise money. Who is that? Well, that's lawyers, and both U.S. and international lawyers, and of course bankers. So moving towards the facilitators is going to be, or is a big shift, and this is going to change, I think, the way many of those facilitators think about how they are doing business, particularly with these oligarchs who are under sanctions. So kudos to the task force for moving over against oligarchs facilitators. Our next story comes to us once again from the Wall Street Journal and the CFO Journal this time. Mike Maurer reports that FASB is adopting crypto accounting and disclosure rules for companies. The Financial Accounting Standards Board has voted to set a new rule on cryptocurrency accounting and disclosure. Changes companies holding these assets have argued more accurately reflect their financial condition. There is no specific accounting or disclosure rules for crypto assets in the U.S., and this has led to a wide variance in the way they have been accounted for or valued. So even if the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and others have not put rules in place, at least FASB has done something. In a really just incredible statement or series of statements, GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy has claimed that the Food and Drug Administration is corrupt. Now, the irony of that is, of course, he founded Rovent Sciences, a U.S. biotech company, which he made billions from, and he got numerous approvals from the FDA, but now he says it's corrupt. Equally interesting is the company's response, which disavowed its former chief executive statement and former chairman of the board. So the current president said, quote, "We have enormous respect for the FDA as our regulator." Really no surprise there, but this statement by Ramaswamy really defies belief. If you're going to be regulated by an industry, make money from that industry's regulator because of the approvals you get and then claim they're corrupt, well, something's wrong in Cincinnati. Next up, from YaHooFinance, disgraced Goldman Sachs banker Roger Ng had more bad news as he was banned for life from banking in Singapore. It's really no surprise, and probably will never get another job in the banking industry anyway, but pretty drastic step from Singapore on Roger Ng. Next up, from the Department of Justice, a very interesting enforcement action. It's a False Claims Act matter. And Verizon Business Solution agreed to pay $4 million plus to resolve an FCA claim that it failed to completely satisfy certain cyber controls in connection with information technology services provided to the federal government. So think about that for a minute. They didn't have an appropriate level of cybersecurity, and they did business with the feds. This is a very strong signal that if you're going to do business with the federal government, you have to have an appropriate compliance program in place for cybersecurity. There are not many areas where having the program or not having the program in place would lead to a fine or penalty, but this is now true in the cyberspace when you do business with the feds. And our final series of stories, we're just going to cite to the Texas Tribune, a great resource for political reporting in the great state of Texas. And of course, it's about the impeachment trial of Attorney General Ken Paxton. And we're now into the witness stage, and I must say the testimony is very, very credible and compelling. Of course, it's the prosecution's case, and the people who are testifying or his former assistants, these are GOP true believers. These are not Democrats or liberals or anything like that by any stretch of the imaginations, and they've clearly demonstrated the slow, creeping nature of corruption involving former or current impeached Attorney General Ken Paxton. Paxton's lawyers have tried to claim, well, they ran to the FBI or they wanted his job or some other nonsense, but it's been very compelling testimony. We're only into the first week and probably a 2-week or longer trial, so we'll continue to watch Ken Paxton.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. As I mentioned in a prior episode, this is the one request I've received most often from podcast listeners of the Daily Compliance News to put together a summary at week's end so that every compliance professional can catch up on the news quite quickly. So I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review to this new podcast addition to the Compliance Podcast Network family, 10 for 10. If you've got an idea for a podcast, I'd love to hear from you. I start many shows based upon ideas from listeners. So give me a shout. You can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. 10 for 10 is a proud member of the Compliance Podcast Network.